Welcome to Excel magic trick number 1325. Hey, if you want to download this Excel workbook, Excel magic trick 1325, start or the finished file or the Access database so you can follow along, click on the link below the video. Hey, we have a great video here. We need to calculate the min and max of alphanumeric text values. How in the world are we going to do that in Excel? Now, here's the cool thing. We have 8 examples here. We're going to have a bunch of examples in Excel, but when we get over to Access and to Power Query in SQL, the min and max functions in these 3 can automatically handle alphanumeric or number values. Now, let's look at our data set. Here it is, student ID and quarter. These are the 2 columns we're interested in. Now, I originally had a large data set that I was dealing with. This was a question at Highline, and there was lots of columns here. And one of the requirements was that we had to be able to sort this in any order. But we always needed to look through and match all the student IDs here for the entire column. So right here, we'd isolate that student ID and then look over here and find the min alphanumeric value. Now, luckily, over here, we have a year quarter table that's sorted. So this is the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, and so on. Now, here's our end result. For each unique student ID, we need to find the min, year, quarter, max, and then calculate the difference between the two. Now, in Excel, if we could actually sort these 2 columns, the solution is really easy. I'm actually going to show you that one first because if you have this type of problem, this is really the way we can go if we can sort. Right-click, sort A to Z. So I'm sorting year, quarter first. Then we'll take that sort within the student ID sort. Now, for us in Excel, what's nice about this is it blocks all the student IDs together. And because we did it first year to quarter, then SID, these are sorted perfectly. Now it's just a matter of over here, looking the student ID up, finding a match. Since there's duplicates, when we do exact match, it'll always go and get the very first one. If we do approximate match, it'll always find the last one. So let's try to solve this if we could sort our source data set. Equals VLOOKUP. I'm looking up student ID, comma, and I'm going to scroll down. Within, there's the first column sorted and our year quarter. F4 to lock it, comma 2, because year quarter is what we're trying to retrieve, comma. And what we want is exact match. Now, you can put false or 0. By putting exact match, duplicates cannot be seen. It is only the first one that will be seen. So when I double click and send this down, go to the last cell, F2, that is working perfect. This student ID, I can clearly see that it got the right one. Now for max, it's no problem. We'll use VLOOKUP on the same exact student ID. The table, same table. F4 to lock it, comma 2. And in this case, we want approximate match. Approximate match will always, if there's duplicates and the first column is sorted, we'll get the last one. Now, approximate match is the default for this function, and you can always tell if there's square brackets around that function argument range lookup. If you know what the default is, then you don't have to put that argument in. And the default is approximate, so I backspace, close parentheses, Control-Enter, double-click and send it down. And boom, it totally gets, for this last student ID here, it gets the correct last quarter. Now, how are we going to calculate the difference from these two? Well, luckily, we have our sorted list here. I'm going to actually look up the max and the min using the match function. Match function will allow us to tab look up a particular item, comma, within a lookup array. I'm going to make sure and lock it. And what does match return? Match will just look through, find it, and tell you the relative position. It literally counts 10 down, so it will report 10. Now, this list will always be sorted, so I can leave that last argument off, just like VLOOKUP to do approximate match. Close parentheses, Control-Enter. double click and send it down. Now that gives me the last. I'm going to click on the top cell, F2. I need to subtract from it using match, looking up the min, comma, within that same range right here. F4, close parentheses. So now we'll take the 10 here, and this A128 is in the second position. 10 minus 2 is 8. But guess what? If I Control Enter, that's actually not correct because we need to include the first quarter. So F2, I need to add 1 to it. Control Enter, double click and send it down. And that will work all the way down. The problem with that, of course, is if I come over here and sort one of the other columns, it totally is not going to work. So we really need a more robust solution. Well, there's a couple ways we can do this in Excel. One way is if we have a helper column, and actually the helper column is the most efficient way, especially in terms of how fast the formulas calculate. Down here, we'll actually see a very interesting formula when we can't have a helper column, but if it's a huge data set, there'll be lots of array calculations going on. Now notice year quarter, I'm simply going to look this up using the match function. For every record, comma, within this list right here. F4, close parentheses, Control Enter, double click and send it down. Now I have a range of relative positions or order of our quarters that's exactly the same size as our student ID. So what I'm going to do over here for this is I would like to find the min. For example, there's that student ID. I need to find the min value of all of the quarter numbers for that student ID. So we see that it's 2. I'd like to use the min function, but this is calculating a min on this column here with one condition from this column. Now, there's a bunch of ways we can do this, and it always depends on which version of Excel you're going to do. I'm going to first do the version that works in all versions. I'm going to say, hey, min. I do not want to highlight all the values because that will give me the incorrect answer. I need to isolate and pick out just the ones I want. So I use the if function. The logical test, I say, hey, look through all the student IDs, F4 to lock it. Are any of you equal to this particular student ID? If I highlight this and evaluate it using the F9 key, I can see I get a true every time it bumps into that student ID. Now, this resultant array is the same size as this column over here with our quarter number. So I can Control Z, comma. The value, if true, I simply put in all of my helper column quarter numbers. F4, I'm going to leave out false because if I do, when it runs into a student ID over here that's not the correct one, it'll put a false into the resultant array. Close parentheses. Now, watch this inside the min function. If I F9, there's my filtered list. All of these are the relative positions or our quarter numbers. Now it can easily find the min. And the reason why is because the false values, which we put in with the if, are completely ignored by the min function and also other aggregate functions. Control Z. Now I come to the end. Close parentheses. Now this is an array formula. The array operation right there, which means instead of operating on just a single item and a single item, this is operating on a bunch of items. And when you make array operations, you always have to look at the function argument. And that logical test will not calculate correctly unless we use the special keystroke, Control, Shift, and Enter. Now, when we use that keystroke, we immediately have to look up to the formula bar to make sure those curly brackets are put in. That's Excel telling you that it understood this was an array formula. Now, I'm going to double click and send that down. Hey, wait a second. That's not what we want, but it is the min quarter or the first quarter that the student took a class, or it's the relative position of this item. So I'm going to use that 2 to go and retrieve that year quarter. I'm going to use this 1 to go and retrieve the first item in this list. F2, I'm going to use that result inside the index function. Now the array, that's all the items that you potentially want to go look up and bring back to the cell. I'm going to hit the F4 key, comma. And then index needs a row number or relative position. And that's what min will deliver. So I come to the end, close parentheses. Now I have to enter this with Control, Shift, and Enter. I verify that the curly brackets are in the formula bar. They are, so I come down, double click, and send it down. Come to the last cell, F2. That is working. Now I want to do the max, so I'm going to put the first cell in edit mode, highlight it, Control C to copy, Escape to revert back to the correctly entered array formula, put it in edit mode, Control V, and I'm simply going to change the IN in min to AX for max. Now this will calculate the max instead of the min. Control Shift Enter, double click, and send it down. And those are the correct min and max. Now if I come over and sort this, watch, when I sort these correctly, this one will come back to the correct calculations, but this one won't change. This one doesn't matter how the data set is sorted. Right click, sort A to Z. Right click, sort A to Z. And instantly these ones stayed the same. These ones are only correct when the data set is sorted correctly. Now this formula right here, notice it's looking up the two max and min year quarters within this range. So I can just copy this formula as a cell and paste it down here, Control V. All of the relative cell references and absolute cell references are the same. Double click and send it down. Now this formula here works in any version when we use min and if and enter it as an array formula. If you have Excel 2010 or later, you want to use the aggregate function for the row number calculation instead. If you're in 2016 or later, and 2016 you have to be careful. You have to have Office 365 Insider Edition. Then you use absolutely the easiest version, MINIFS. Now I have a video that talks about aggregate, MINIFS, and a bunch of other calculations for max and min with conditions. You can watch that video. All right, so this one works if it's sorted. This one works if it's not sorted. Now, I want to see how to create a formula down here if we're not allowed to have this helper column. Now, anytime you build a helper column here and you want to get rid of it and create an array formula, you can usually help yourself figure out how to create the formula by looking at the helper column. Now, notice as I go down this column, the match lookup value is always looking at an individual year quarter for each record. Because think about this. If I can't have this helper column, what if I could simulate this helper column in this cell down here? Then I wouldn't have to have this helper column. Again, the trick here is notice. I'm watching this as I go down. The blue one is always in the row here. Well, what if I come down here and instead of just putting match and lookup value just a single value, what if I highlight the entire column? And I'm going to hit F4 because I have to copy this down. Now, lookup value is expecting a single value to look up. Anytime you put more than one value here, you're doing what's called a function argument array operation. When I put all those in there, it'll instruct match to simultaneously find an answer, which is a relative position for every single one of those values. So that's all of the items I'm going to look up, comma. And remember, the lookup array, just like we did in this helper column, is simply this correctly sorted unique list of year quarters. Now I'm going to hit F4 to lock that. And remember, that's sorted, so we don't need to put in match type because it will do approximate match. Close parentheses. My cursor's at the end, so I'm going to hit the F9 key to evaluate. And check that out. That simulates our helper column. It's exactly the same. Now, if we're going to look up the correct year quarter, meaning the min quarter, based on that student ID, I first need to filter this list here based on the student ID. So now I'm going to Control Z. I'm going to use the if function. And the logical test, I'm going to say, hey, any of you student IDs over here, F4 to lock it, are any of you equal to this student ID, comma. Now that is the logical test, F9. It gives me trues and falses. Control Z. And in the value if true, remember F9, now the trues and falses can pick out the correct quarter numbers or relative positions. Control Z, come to the end. I'm leaving out false because remember, if we do it inserts falses into the resultant array, close parentheses. The cursor's at the end, so I hit F9, and boom, there it is. This time it's sorted, right? So they're all at the beginning, but this formula works no matter if it's sorted or not. Now what do I need? I need the minimum. Control Z, so now I use inside the min, I will put that entire array. Now this is definitely an array formula. It's got a function argument, array operation there. It's got one there, and none of these arguments can handle array operations unless we use Control, Shift, and Enter. If I double click and send it down, there is the correct relative position for looking up this year quarter. So in the top cell, F2, I use index. The array, I'm trying to figure out which one of these items to look up, F4, comma, and there is the correct relative position or row number. Close parentheses, Control, Shift, Enter. Double click and send it down. Now I'm going to come over here and highlight this because we only need to change one thing. Control C, Escape. Edit mode, Control V. I simply need to change in to AX. Now it'll calculate the max year quarter for that particular student ID. Control Shift Enter, double click and send it down. And then we can use the same formula, Control C, down here, Control V, double click and send it down. Now interestingly enough, if we were to try to use the 2010 and 16 method, MINIFS would require this as the min values. And MINIFS, MAXIFS, SUMIFS, COUNTIFS, the criteria range and the number arguments cannot handle array operations. So you actually couldn't use MINIFS. You could reorganize these array calculations with aggregate, however. All right, so those are some formula methods in Excel. Now, I actually want to go jump over to Access. Now, over here in Access, we have SID-YR table, SID year quarter, and we have our lookup table in essence. However, this table also has this additional column where there's an auto incrementer number to tell us which quarter it is, 1 to 10. So we have our two tables over here. And we want to build a query to do the same report. So I'm going to go to Create, Query Design, and we're going to build this one in Query Design. We need both tables, so I double click. I can close the Show Table. There it is. There's a one-to-many relationship already. So we can pull from both tables, and they will communicate with each other. That means we could show student ID and do a min and max calculation on YRQ, and then pull from it the order to calculate the difference. All right, so you ready? I'm going to drag student ID down to the first column. Then I'm going to drag quarter once and twice. And you're not going to believe this. I can do a min and max calculation on alphanumeric values in Access using the min and max function. Now we need to right-click to show the total row. That way we can group by, which means it'll do the min and max calculation by an individual SID. And then for these two, we simply change the aggregate calculation to min and to max. Now what group by does, you can think of it like SUMIFS, COUNTIFS, MINIFS, and MAXIFS. In essence, it'll take all the student IDs and group them together and then do these aggregate calculations for each. Now let's go look at the answer. And you've got to be kidding. The min and max function totally did its thing on alphanumeric values. In essence, if you think of it as COUNTIFS, SUMIFS, MINIFS, there's the criteria for making our calculations. But really what group by does is it gets all of the records for this and then makes an aggregate calculation just on those. Now let's go back underneath to Design View, and we need to add an extra column to calculate the difference. Right-click, Zoom. And what we're going to do here is we need a name for this new field. It's going to be QDIFF, so quarter difference. And we put a colon. That colon says everything before will be the new field name or calculated field name. Everything after will be our formula. MIN for the min function, open parentheses, then in square brackets from the year quarter, there's our order. ORDER, close square brackets. Formulas in Access and in Excel tables require field names in square brackets. For that matter, over in Power Pivot also we have to use square brackets for field names. So we got min. Actually, I did it backwards. This is supposed to be max. So we take the max minus the min, square bracket, order, close square bracket, close parentheses. And then we need to remember to add 1. There you go. There's the label at the top. There's our formula. Click OK. Now we need to be sure and come down to the total row and say this is an expression. This is a formula. Now we can go and run this. I'm going to click View, and there it is. The same thing we got over in Excel. Control S, and I'll give it a good name. Min, max, year, quarter by SID. Click OK. Now I'm going to close this, and I'm going to close Access. Go back over to Excel, and I'm actually going to import it using data and get external data from Access. We want Excel Magic Trick 1325, double click. It's the second one here that we just created, and that is a query. When I click OK, here's our dialog box. I'm going to click OK, and instantly there is our import. If anything changes over in Access, we can right-click Refresh. Now, that's over in Access, but we got to check this out. Here in Excel 2016, or in earlier versions, you can download Power Query. If we have our data in 2 tables, import both tables, then merge them, and use Power Query to create the same report. Not only that, but Power Query min and max function will totally respect alphanumeric values. I'm going to click in the first table, go up to Data. Get and transform is what they call Power Query, and from table. The keyboard is Alt-A-P-T. I need to load this as a connection, so I come to Close and Load. Close and Load to only a connection. Click Load. There's our first table. Import it into Power Query. Click in the second table, Alt-A-P-T. Now this table, I want to add an order column. So watch this. I come up to Add Column. Add Index Column, and I'm going to start from 1. These, in essence, will be our relative positions, or they will be the quarters. Now I'm going to say Home, Close and Load to only a connection. Load. Now we have our 2 tables. Now we can merge them. We come back up, Data, New Query. We want to combine and merge. Now, just as we had in Access, there was a one-to-many relationship. We're going to select the first table, YRQ, that's the many side. Our second table, YRQ, that's the one side. Now we're going to do a left outer, all from the first, matching from the second. We can see we have all the matches from the second. But in essence, what this merge will do with a one-to-many relationship is we will be able to get the actual relative position merged into this table. So for any row, we'll know what the relative position or quarter is. I'm going to click OK. Let's give this a good name. Min, max, diff, YRQ by SID. Now we're given a table here. That's the merge table, but we're going to expand it. So I click on the Expand button. I want these field names, so I uncheck this. Click OK. And there it is right there. Now we're not going to need these 2 middle columns, so I select the first one, hold Shift, and select the second one. Right-click, Remove. Now we can use Group By, just like we did in Access. It'll give us a unique list and then do calculations. And we're going to do calculations min and max on both columns. So there it is, group by. That's the column we're going to group by, or that's the column we'll get the unique list that'll be the criteria for our aggregate calculations. Now we're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4. The first one will say min YRQ tab, and I'm going to down arrow to get the min, tab, tab. And the column for this first one will be YRQ, tab, 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 max YRQ tab. We'll do max tab, and this will still be on YRQ, tab, tab. This will be min, min order tab. We'll use the min, tab, tab. And this will be on the index, tab, tab. This will be max order tab. We'll do max, tab, tab. And this will be on the index. There we go. We're grouping by SID. There's 4 aggregate calculations on 2 different columns. Click OK. Now we have one last step. We need to subtract these 2. So we go to Add Column, Add Custom Column. Our name will be QDiff. And our calculation will be, hey, the max, uh-oh, I spelled it wrong. We're going to get rid of that column anyway. Double click that. So max order minus min, and then +1. When I click OK, there's the final column. We're going to need that one in our final report. We don't need these 2 inner ones. Click on the first and hold Shift or Control. Click on the second, right-click, remove. And there's our report. Home, close, and load. To, and this one we're going to say to a table, existing sheet. Let's try to click there, collapse button. I want to try to put it in R26. Click OK. Load, and there we have used Power Query with min and max working on alphanumeric values. Now, the last method, you can skip to the end in the time hyperlinks below. I'm going to actually use an antique just to show you the SQL. MS query, you got to be kidding me. We're going to go up to data, get external data from other sources. We would never use Microsoft Query when we have Power Query, but I'm going to use this as a method to show the SQL. MS Access Database, uncheck that, click OK. Now, actually, this I heard that this is something we used to use in the old days, but I don't think it even has all the capabilities that it used to. Now we need to find in E, it's this database right here. I'm going to click OK. We have 2 tables, double click, send them to the top, close this. Now we have our 2 tables. Click on the SQL button, and here it is. We're going to select. Select is always followed by our columns to select, or our aggregate calculations. We definitely want SID, comma. The comma always separates whatever columns and aggregate calculations you have. The min, and we have 2 tables with the same field name, so I'm going to have to type the table name, student ID, year, quarter, dot, and then the field name. Close parentheses. So we'll do a min calculation on that one, comma, space, and then the max of our table, dot, and our field. Close parentheses. Now we need to do that difference calculation. So comma, we will do, and guess what? Since we have a relationship between the 2 tables looking into Access, we can just straight do, hey, give me the min of order, close parentheses, minus the max. And I did that backwards. This should be the ax there and the in here. Order, close parentheses. Order and SID don't need the table name before because they're unique between the 2 tables. Now, those are the aggregate calculations in column that come after select. Now we do enter, and from which tables? We always put the tables after from, so it's going to be SID, YRQ. And because we have our 2 tables, we need to explicitly put inner join YRQ. Now, we've joined those, but we need to say on which columns they're joined. ON. And then we have to put our table names and column names. SID YRQ dot YRQ. That's the first field in the first table. Are you equal to YRQ? That's the table name and the field name. That'll connect them. Then we have one last group by command. Group by what? SID. Semicolon. You've got to be kidding me. There's the SQL. Now, when I click OK, we're going to have a little bit of trouble, but we're going to just say OK. And there it is. There is the same report using SQL. Now, that SQL will work in most systems. Sometimes the join is a little bit different in different systems. But here we're going to File, Return Data to Microsoft Excel. I'm going to put it right down there. Click OK. And there it is, the same exact set of student IDs, min, max, and the difference. Wow, that was an amazing video. In our last three examples using SQL, Power Query, and Access, we saw that the min and max can work on alphanumeric values. And then in Excel, we saw a few different ways to do this. If the data set was sorted properly, we could actually just use straight VLOOKUPs and match. If the data wasn't sorted and we had a helper column, we could use a min, if, array calculation and index. Or if we had Excel 2010, we can use aggregate. If we had the right version of 2016, we could use index and MINIFS. And then, of course, if we didn't have the helper column and it wasn't sorted properly, we could use this array formula right here, which simulates that helper column to get the min and max alphanumeric values and then calculate the difference. All right, we'll see you next video.